Guys, Martin here bringing another Dragon Ball Z Dokkan battle video, and so today we are going to jump in and start ranking these new LRs, the new meta. Everything has changed. We are looking at a new landscape for Dokkan, new leader skill meta, new events coming. I wanted to do this at the beginning of the anniversary because obviously we're going to get part 2 LRs. We're going to get the free-to-play LRs, and I don't think they're necessarily going to make it onto the list. But it'll be interesting to look back once we get to like the end of the anniversary, and we've not only got the part 2 LRs, but also all the new events, like the final stages of the new red zones and blue zones, which I'm sure will be a lot more difficult and potentially bring us the new hardest event in the game. It'll be interesting to see how this list has changed from the beginning of the anniversary to the end, because obviously some units might get buffed by the part 2 releases and teams. Some units might be much better in some of the end game events depending on how they're structured, and we'll talk about that with one unit in particular when we get to him. He's kind of hard to place on the list because I feel like he could be higher for certain types of events. But yeah, we're going to jump in and talk about the top 10 LRs. There's a couple of honorable mentions in this one as well, because honestly this list was very difficult to make, and I think I talked about this when we did the LR tier list last time. Is the top 10 is so close in certain places, like not to say that 10 is close to 1, but like all the way up the list units are so close. Like you could switch 6 and 7, you could switch 4 and 5. There's multiple ones that could have made it in to be number 10, some that have only just dropped off but have arguments for being 10 or may potentially just end up being at 11. It's very difficult to rate all of these guys in the same spot. And in fact, there is a unit that I now realize I didn't bring up, but we'll talk about him now in a minute anyway. So before we jump in, as always with my tier lists, you know, I'll stop yapping and get into the list. I know that's what you guys want. I know there's some of you that will have already skipped it to the end just to look at the list and have already typed a comment complaining about some of the placements without listening to the explanations, because at the end of the day, I no longer expect that no one's going to do that, right? People just do that and it is what it is. But as always with my tier lists, it's down to my personal experience and my interpretation of using the units. Obviously, if I've gotten really bad RNG every time I've used a certain unit, they might be lower on the list for me than they might be for you if they seem like an absolute god every time you use them. But at the end of the day, it is just my opinion. If you do disagree, do let me know why down below in the comment section in a civilized fashion, and I'm more than happy to reply, have those discussions. I've said this before, people actually having reasonable conversation in the comments has caused me to change my mind on placements before, whereas people just coming in being like, you put this guy here, nah. Like that's not going to have any effect on me like whatsoever. I'm just going to ignore it and move on, right? So people will always make those comments. The internet is what it is, but you know, we're just going to jump straight in. So you can see we've got STR Blue Evolution Vegeta as the first page up on the list, and that is because he is at number 10 with an asterisk. He is at number 10 because essentially, as I was putting the list together, I dragged the first 3, like the 3 new LRs onto the list and just put them at 1, 2 and 3. And then as I started bringing new units in, obviously I would start moving them down, right? And it got to the point where I was just putting on all these units onto the list, and it's just like, yeah, this unit's better than Vegeta. Then we put the next one on. Yeah, this guy's probably better than Vegeta as well. To the point where Vegeta's got pushed all the way down to the bottom. And the funny thing is, I also hadn't made space for a couple of other units that we'll talk about now. You've got like the Int Blue Evolution Vegeta. I've seen a lot of people making like the argument like, is this guy actually just straight up better than the STR one? And then of course there's AGL UI Goku, who in a lot of events with that turn 1 guaranteed dodge, like this guy and the Int Blue Evolution Vegeta have managed to hang on to these top 10 lists for quite a while. I think the last one I did, they were quite close to the bottom, but they were still on the list. And having that turn 1 guaranteed dodge, having the revival that both of these guys have that obviously this guy doesn't, is really big. And the thing is, when it comes to Blue Evolution Vegeta, I do think he's being underrated, which is kind of a funny thing to say with me putting him at the bottom place on the list. But just overall in general, like people saying that he's trash or that he's bad, like I don't think that is the case. It's just the fact that he released along 2 absolute powerhouse units, and he's just nowhere near as good as the Vegito or the Super Saiyan 4 Goku. So he is a good unit. Like, being at number 10 on a list, think how many LRs we have now that are good, how many units that have kind of just dropped off the bottom of this list. Like, him being at number 10 is not me saying that he's bad, but he's just nowhere near as good as these other units. He requires a lot of RNG. Like, he's not a slot 1 unit. And then obviously, whilst he is an orb changer, he is requiring you to pick up a certain number of orbs, which then gives him his extra attacks, each of which only has a medium chance to become a super. And then his damage reduction from his intro buff like runs out after 6 turns, but he wants to have super attacked 6 times in order to get that extra 30%. Because ideally, if you can get that to build up while the intro is still active, then obviously he's going to have a lot of damage reduction. But because his additional attacks only have a medium chance to become a super, even if you do pick up 10 orbs, you can get the turn where he just does a bunch of additional normals, and then you're nowhere close to filling out this last part of his passive. And it's just such a confusing design. I can't think off the top of my head. I think it's Scout of Vegeta, because so funnily enough, another Vegeta card, right, that has this kind of head-scratching design of like, why did they limit him in this way, right, when you compare him to Vegito and Super Saiyan 4 Goku. Like, his additional attacks could have been a medium chance to become a super, and that doesn't suddenly make him the best unit in the game. But it being a medium chance is really disappointing. And like, even with the character performing attacks in battle, like, even if they made this number slightly higher, but just made it any attacks instead of supers, so that you're pretty much guaranteed to get it by like after his 2nd appearance. Whereas if you get bad RNG and you're only getting like 1 or 2 supers a turn, it's going to take you 3 or more appearances to actually get this damage reduction. And then to get the guaranteed crit, he needs to do 7 super attacks. So his kit is just limited in a really, really strange way. It feels like he got the least amount of the budget for the 3, right? Like, his art's really good. I do think his animations are good, but again, just like the unit himself, good, but worst out of the 3. Even the UI Goku unit super, which I was really hyped for, isn't really that great. Like, it's good. It's not like bad in terms of quality, but it is like, you know, slightly redone, like reused bits from other attacks. They kind of feel like they are just put together, like the final attack with them sort of side by side. It does just feel like 2 separate animations put together, as opposed to the example I saw someone give in a comment where it's like the unit super with Beast Gohan and Orange Piccolo, where it's like fully clearly designed to be them there together doing an attack, right? I know it's like inspired by the Xenoverse thing. So Vegeta just really, really bad. The other page I forgot to bring up, which I guess we could just open up here quickly, is of course Tech UI Goku. Who Tech UI Goku has, for me, always been a bit lower on the list than like these guys, because his base form is not as good as the transform. When he transforms, obviously he goes absolutely crazy. So I'd probably say, is he better than this Vegito as well? Maybe. Obviously with the domain and like the crazy stuff he does when he transforms. Vegeta, the only real thing he has going for him compared to these units is the fact that he is now the best leader for the team by having the 220 leader skill. But yeah, like, I could very easily see an argument for any one of these guys being above him, which then for me means he would drop off the list and not even be in the top 10. So let me know what you guys think down below in the comment section. Obviously, spoiler there for number 9. I actually put 2 units at number 9 because I really couldn't decide between the 2 of them. And then what would have been really funny is by putting one of them at number 10, it would have pushed Vegeta off the list completely. And that is the Janemba and then the Int Broly. Now, Int Broly I think is underrated. Janemba obviously is a beast. The big problem for me, and I'll just admit it, like hands up here now, some of you guys know, because if you've been around the channel a while, I've obviously talked about it. I don't have Int Broly. So I've used him as a friend, I've used him on the private server, I haven't used him as much as I would if I did have him. My opinion of him definitely went up after his release, after trying him out as a friend and trying out some of these different team builds. Obviously he's at his strongest really with double leads, because he gets the extra buff from having the domain up. And of course, if you have double leads, kind of like with the way the slug rotations work, is once one of them, like domain runs out, you can use the other one, and then they're both getting that full buff for that combined amount of time. But Broly is really, really good. Obviously extreme units I feel like are at a bit of a disadvantage now, because with all the new units being super and the new leader skill meta all being like super class units getting the 220, it kind of gives some of these other characters on the list a bit more of a buff than the extreme characters are getting. But yeah, Janemba obviously is crazy. We're going to get the Int Janemba Super Easy A soon, which depending on how good that is, because they have the same name, this guy might get replaced on the team by a Super Easy A, depending on the particular team or the particular build. But not to suggest that he's not good, of course. Janemba is absolutely crazy. I just really couldn't decide where to put, which of these to put at 9. So I just decided to put both of them at 9 because, you know, it's my list. So one of them's 9 and the other one's 9.5, I guess. But let me know which one you think should be at 9 and which one should be at 10, I guess, and push the other ones off the list if we were really going to do it properly. Then we move up to 8, and this is where we have the physical Super Saiyan trio. Now, on my last list, I did put Int Broly above them, but a lot of people did not like that. But I've kind of been going back and forth on this unit for a while. As content was getting harder, especially with only having them at 55%, I was getting into a lot of situations where they were getting killed. But obviously this unit, one of their biggest strengths is the crazy amount of defense that they provide to everybody else. But I think one of the things that made me sort of sour on them a little bit, which I think is a reasonable thing to have to look at, is they only get their extra damage reduction and give allies that extra defense when you have a movie hero or all-out struggle ally on the same turn. Now, don't get me wrong, that's not a difficult condition if you want to make the team work and like make sure they have an ally that does that. But it does limit them in the sense that you can't just throw them on any team and be like, oh yeah, these guys, you know, they're really good, they give everyone a bunch of defensive support, because they don't unless they have the right ally on the rotation. And of course, because these guys, because it's Gohan, Trunks and Goku, they do get to be on Earthbred Fighters, but they're not on that new Earth Protecting Heroes category, which is a real shame, because obviously they would then get the full leader skill from the new Vegito, and they would probably be like a go-to unit on that team. Even though Vegito himself isn't a movie hero or all-out struggle character, you could definitely make a really strong like team and a really strong build with these guys on there. But unfortunately they are not on that team. But these guys are still really good. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm sure if we get the if the part 2 unit ends up having like movie heroes as part of their leader skill, and then these guys are then on like a new 220% team, I could easily see these guys moving up the list like quite significantly. But for now in the meta, this is where we have them at number 8. And as I said at the very beginning, remember, with all of these placements, you could easily move each one around like 1 or 2, and it probably doesn't make a huge difference. Like, I probably wouldn't be too argumentative about it because the units are so close, right? Now at number 7, I have Gotenks. Now, Gotenks is a little bit lower, but he's the unit that I mentioned earlier that it kind of depends on the event, right? Because Gotenks is really, really good. He can be absolutely crazy. He's on Vegito's 220% team. The only problem with him is the RNG of his being able to tank super attacks, right? If you get hit with a super and he doesn't get this 777% defense, once you are a few turns into the event, or more than 5 turns, and he's lost his little bit of extra damage reduction, he will die to those big super attacks, especially in slot 1. Whereas like if you are getting that 777 proc, he can slot 1 against some of the toughest bosses in the game. And the reason why he could be an interesting placement is, I've mentioned it, we've used it to showcase a couple of different characters now. There's the Namek Saga stage for the Vegeta story Red Zone, where basically every single boss has a Ki Blast super attack. So he gets this extra damage reduction, which basically makes him almost invincible to Ki Blast supers. So if we get like the final stages of these new events, like I say, when we come back to revisit this list towards the end of the anniversary, if the new hardest event in the game has multiple phases, including the actual final boss phase, that have Ki Blast super attacks, then obviously Gotenks' value goes up tremendously. So he is still really, really good. I still think he is one of the best units in the game. He's one of my favorite units to run currently on the teams that he is on. So again, like him being at 7, which is kind of crazy, is not any sort of insult to him. He just really, really is that good. I mean, I could see arguments for swapping him. We'll talk about number 6 now. Number 6, we have Tech Goku and Vegeta that's fused into Gogeta. Now, a lot of people rate these guys a lot higher. A lot of people will say like, oh, these guys should be number 1 or they should be top 3. But the thing is, I've said before on these lists, same with what I said with Tech UI Goku, is units that have to transform, like Super Gogeta has the argument for being the best or being in top 3. Well, maybe before this list, right? Because we've got all the new units, but we'll get to that. Gogeta has an argument for being way higher on the list than where we've put this unit, but you don't start off as Gogeta. And the reason why he's at this point on the list is because I think there's all the characters that are above him are definitely better than the Goku and Vegeta base form. And so then it just comes down to how do you want to rate your units. I've said this before when I've done my list multiple times, that I value like consistency and stuff like that. If a unit is the best unit in the game when they transform on like turn 6, then for me, I'm not necessarily putting them at number 1 in the list if another unit is way better than them for those first like 5 turns. Because then, especially for shorter events, them being the best unit in the game on turn 6 doesn't make any difference, right? Now, obviously, for these guys, that's a bit of an over-exaggeration because these guys, you don't have to wait until turn 6. It's turn 4 and 70% or more HP, which is the better condition compared to STR Vegito, especially now as teams are getting more and more HP. Being at 70% or more is going to be a lot easier, and getting the fusion for these guys is going to be a lot easier. And, of course, again, with the Part 2 character, you know, we know who it is, right? This guy's probably going to be on their team with the full leader skill with a new partner, and obviously going to be very, very good. So these guys could easily go back up the list a little bit more. But like, I could see arguments as well. Like Tech Gotenks is probably better than these guys in their base. So I could quite easily move Gotenks above these guys. But of course, Gogeta is so much better than Gotenks. It's kind of hard to really pin down exactly where you want to put this guy, but for now he's at number 6. I know a lot of people will think he should be higher, but obviously let me know your thoughts in the comments. At number 5, so moving into the top 5, number 5 we have Family Kamehameha Gohan. This guy I still think is really good. I feel like he gets underrated a little bit now. I've seen people putting him a lot lower on lists, but I feel like turn 1 he's probably not doing anything too crazy, but if he gets a couple of additionals even within that first turn, he can start to do some pretty decent damage. And of course, you know, the Family Kamehameha is one of the hardest hitting attacks in the game if you can get it charged up. He's on the new Vegito's full 220% lead. But the big thing that makes him really good, or that makes him really useful, is you can, if you want to start charging the Family Kamehameha early, you can. And obviously he can be a very, very strong defensive character once he's in the standby. Or you can leave him, and what I normally do when I throw him onto some of these teams is I float him off and don't necessarily use the standby straight away. And then as you start to get nearer to the end of the event, you throw him into the standby to start charging the Kamehameha. And the thing is, as long as you're not getting screwed over by the orb field, like, he's really, really strong defensively in this mode, which I find now with some of these events, with how hard some of the enemies can hit, and you know how unpredictable it can be unless you have a scouter active of like where the super attack's going to be. If you pick up enough orbs, this guy can easily go into any slot you want him to be on the rotation and be able to tank perfectly fine without you having to worry about dying. And then of course you get the Family Kamehameha off, like we said, and it does a pretty crazy amount of damage. I think this unit is really, really good. Again, like, you could definitely argue that Tech Gogeta is better than him, but like Goku and Vegeta are definitely not better than him. So for me, he is at number 5. If you wanted to switch him and Gogeta, again, as I've said, any units that are next to each other, if you wanted to switch them, I'm probably not going to make any sort of real complaint about it, but he is at number 5 for me. Then we get to number 4, we have Tech Broly. Tech Broly, still an absolute beast, still one of the best extreme units, that absolute slot 1 god tank for turn 1. And then once you transform, it's not like he then becomes a slouch defensively after that, right? He's still incredibly strong defensively, able to do some big damage. You get to use the active skill straight away on the turn after that, which makes him even more powerful. He has an AoE, which is kind of funny, like some of the new events that are coming out, there are some phases where you have multiple enemies, which can be kind of useful. But Tech Broly is just absolutely fantastic. Very, very well designed character. Great asset to all of the teams that he's on. He is just really, really good, and he just is that guy from the beginning. Like turn 1, he does exactly what you want for a lot of these teams, being the slot 1 tank that you'll need on certain rotations, and then after that you just transform, and his performance is just incredibly strong. I think this guy is really, really good, really, really well designed unit. I see some people arguing that he should be at 3 over the number 3 pick, and they both have their own different strengths, right? So Broly's at number 4 for me. He is absolutely fantastic. But we'll jump in, and at number 3, we have Beast Gohan. So this is one of the first times, I think this is the first list I've done in a while where Beast hasn't been top, I believe. I think my last tier list, I think he was number 1, because that team protection ability is just so valuable. And obviously with Glorio releasing, giving him that 200% demonic power lead team that had an insane amount of support, he was looking even crazier on there. And of course, he's on the new Vegito's full 220% lead. I put a showcase video out today, which was an absolute disaster. I had the worst RNG possible. So do check that video out if you haven't seen it. It's pretty... it's a pretty epic fail, but Beast himself obviously is very, very good. Like on that turn, on that team, with the extra stats, he can do very, very well. His biggest strength, of course, is always still his defensive capability. He's not coming out of the gate dropping like 30 million attack stats, but he can still hit relatively hard. His defense is very good. His biggest issue with, which a lot of these units have that have these kind of abilities, where if there's no attacks in slot 1, or like no AoE attack, then he can't get hit before he attacks, unless it's going to be the turn where you use his active skill. So then he doesn't get that extra attack buff, and then he can look a little bit disappointing offensively. But I think with the events getting as difficult as they are now, him being a little bit disappointing offensively sometimes is nowhere near as big of an issue as like the amount of defensive support that he provides to the team, right? And even things like giving the extra key when he gets hit is quite good. But yeah, the active skill obviously still very, very good. Taunt abilities, like team protection abilities, still very, very strong. And this guy absolutely still looking like a top tier unit in the game. Number 3 for me, which means, of course, he is only dethroned by 2 of the new characters. Now, for the last 2, I think it's pretty obvious for most people to guess the order. Number 2, we have Super Saiyan 3 GT Goku. This unit is crazy good. I don't know if people really have already realized how insane he is. I guess I need to wait until I start seeing other people's lists more and stuff, but this guy's really, really good. His design is absolutely fantastic, right? He has the great chance to dodge and guard for 4 turns, but then once that runs out, you're then able to transform into the Great Ape. So there's none of this issue with like the blue frauds where guard runs out and then they can't fuse, so then they get you killed, right? He has his defensive abilities right up until you can transform, and of course you can transform early if you want to as well, with HP 70% or less. So this guy, he's really good. People I think underestimate just how much he gets when attacking, because he gets a 240% attack and defense buff if you got 24 key when attacking. So if his start of turn defense, I've seen like obviously Rainbow, like on some of the private server showcase things that I've done, you can see him start of turn being at like 350k defense, for example. So plus 240% to that puts him straight over 1 million defense already, and that's without taking into effect the fact that both of his supers greatly raise defense as well. So he's got well over 1 million defense after attacking, which is then backed up by a 70% chance to dodge and guard. So he is still very strong defensively. Obviously, he could get tagged by really big supers, but by the time you get to that point in most of these events, you're going to have transformed anyway, right? And so once you transform into the Golden Grey Ape, it's for 1 turn only. You can do a nice little bit of free damage, and then of course he transforms into Super Saiyan 4 Goku. Nothing really much to say about the Grey Ape, like it is what it is, right? It's most useful when you want to cancel out like enemy super attacks or enemy special abilities. Although I suppose that does create the one minor nitpick, is you kind of, on the one hand, you might want to save that for when it's the most tactically advantageous against like a really tough boss or against an AoE boss if we get one. But at the same time, you kind of want to use it early because you want to get Super Saiyan 4 Goku out. But once you get Super Saiyan 4 Goku out, this guy is absolutely crazy. Ridiculous support for Power Beyond Super Saiyan and Giant Ape Power. Power Beyond Super Saiyan obviously being an insane category. 70% defense and 10% damage reduction. That makes so many units in a similar sort of effect to the physical trio. That makes so many other units significantly better with all of this defensive support. And then a massively underrated ability that he has that I don't see people like praise enough is this 44% or less HP at the start of the turn. You recover 44% HP. Now, we've seen, I did the video the other day, we're starting to get teams now where we can hit up to 1 million defense, which means 44% or less HP on that team is like 440k, which is still a decent amount of HP. But if you're starting the turn on that HP or less, you're then getting a 440k HP heal from this guy, and it's an infinite amount of times any time you're at 44% or less at the start of the turn. So if you are running double Goku leads and you've got them both transformed, any time you end the turn under 44% HP, you're just getting that massive heal at the start of the next turn, which is really, really good. And then Goku obviously gets crits for 4 turns, gets a guaranteed additional super on 24 ki. Like, he can just hit like an absolute truck. He is just very, very good and very well designed. Like, very good offensively, very good defensively, even before transforming. But then he's providing a crazy amount of support. You can throw this guy on any team that he's on. And even if he doesn't have then his best link partners or anything, he might not have his personal best, like, individual performance, but he's going to be providing so much to the rest of the team as well that he's just really, really good. He is absolutely fantastic. And of course, he would be number 1 if it was not for the new Super Saiyan Goku plus Super Saiyan Vegeta, who of course fuse into Super Vegito. I mean, this is kind of one of those things. It just reminds me of like when Beast Gohan came out, where this guy should be number 1 on everybody's list, and I would not understand really any argument for why he wouldn't be. Like I said before, right, you can swap some of these other units around on the list, but this guy at number 1 I think is just irrefutable. I probably would also say I think this guy at number 2 is like locked in as well, but I guess it depends if you really wanted to argue the team protection ability so strongly that you put this guy above him. But Vegito at number 1, or Goku and Vegeta / Vegito at number 1, I think is just an absolute, like, no contest, right? The new leader skill meta with the 250% to HP and the 220 to stats. Goku himself is already really good, very solid stats, damage reduction for the first couple of turns, providing support, gets a guaranteed additional super and is effective against all types with the key that you're getting, damage reduction and extra super if he's in slot 2 or 3. Then you can start exchanging with Vegeta, and Vegeta is just a slot 1 crazy tank that stacks defense, is also providing that little bit of support. And then of course you get to the ability to use the active skills. Now this guy's active skill, I think people do underrate. Like, his active skill is really, really good, and when you use it, this buff also then applies if you switch back to Goku. So Goku will then have guard permanently in any slot as well as the stat buff. The only problem, of course, is as cool as it is and as useful and as an ability as it is, it means you then can't fuse into Vegito, which, let's be fair, is like the main event, right? This is the thing that people want to see. Vegito is absolutely busted. As the actual transformed version, like, he just gaps the game, I think, and that's why he is limited. That's why they said, even in the live stream, he's a limited turn fusion, because the game balancing would just be messed up if you just fused into Vegito and you were then Vegito permanently, because he's just that powerful. And I do kind of like that. Like, I know some people complain about the limited turn fusion, but I would rather him be crazy powerful for these 4 turns. Because obviously at the moment, until we start getting new stages, I've actually never seen him revert to Vegito, because you just end the event, especially if you're running 2 of them and you fuse both of them. Like, you don't get to the point where he then defuses, right? So it'd be interesting to see what that looks like in the future for some of these other events. But once Vegito comes out, he is just absolutely ridiculous. He has a scouter for the 4 turns that he's out. He does the counters, which can do ridiculous damage. Every time he gets hit, he's doing more and more damage. He gets off the bunch of attacks. He only has an ultra super, which is a very interesting new mechanic, so any additionals are all ultra supers as well. They do pretty solid damage. He is a counter unit, so he's not a character that just is doing like a 40 million attack stat, right? I've seen him doing, even at Rainbow, sort of like 13 to 18, but he does a couple of those, and then the counters that he does insane damage overall. And then of course he has the active skill, which does big damage, gives him ridiculous defense. One of the videos we did the other day where I was using a Rainbow one, on the active skill turn, had over 5 million defense. And bear in mind, he has 60% damage reduction and guard, so he just is invincible, right? And he targets all the attacks onto himself, so just like Beast Gohan, that team protection ability is a huge amount of value. So yeah, I mean, I feel like we don't really need to say much else about him, right? Like, he is number 1, just undisputed. He is absolutely ridiculous. Can't wait to see what they do with part 2, because remember last year Beast was part 2 and came out as the undisputed number 1. So imagine if we had that kind of crazy like leap again, because a unit in part 2 would have to be so insanely good for everyone to just agree like undisputedly they were better than Vegito. So I think they won't be quite that much of a gap, but hopefully the best year part 2 unit is on the same kind of level as Vegito. So let me know what you guys think. Here's the full list here with the kind of honorable mentions and the kind of cheat pick for 9 where we pick 2 characters, but in reverse order we've got the STR Blue Evolution Vegeta with the honorable mentions to the 6 years. Let me know if you think either of them are actually better than him. We've got the Int Broly or Janemba at number 9. Obviously if you think one should be at 9, one should be at 10, or even one should be at 8 and replace the physical trio, let me know. 8 the physical trio, 7 Tech Gotenks, 6 Tech Gogeta, 5 is the STR Gohan, 4 Tech Broly, 3 Beast Gohan, 2 Super Saiyan 3 to Super Saiyan 4 Goku, and then number 1 is the Super Saiyan Goku plus Super Saiyan Vegeta that fuses into Vegito. So let me know what you guys think down below in the comment section. Like I said at the beginning, you know, if you've skipped right to the end just to see the list, like, the explanations are in the video. If you have any disagreements, do let me know why you disagree in the comments and we can have some back and forth about it. But I'm very excited to see how this list will have changed by the end of the anniversary, because obviously there is a bit of recency bias with the new units. We need the new events to finish coming out so the new meta can really form, but it'd be interesting to see how this changes. Let me know your guys' thoughts down below in the comment section. So that is going to be it for the video, guys. This has been the Masked Ningen. Smash that like button, subscribe to the channel if you are new, check out the links down below, and I will see you all again soon. Have a good one.